Well, good morning again, everybody. My name is Joel, and I have the honor of being the lead pastor here. If you are a guest here today, we are so excited you're here. Relax. We're not going to embarrass you. We do have something afterwards for you. We'll tell you about that. It takes just 8 minutes. It's real quick. But we're just glad you're here. If you're joining us online, we'll say a special welcome to you as well. We know some of you are doing your homework on us, and you're checking us out. So wherever and whenever you're watching this, we're glad you're there. And we are convinced that you will love it when you are finally able to be here. So we can't wait to meet you as well. You know, there's a lot of things in life that you can get away with not being prepared for. You can cram for the test and still pass. Some of us. You can be late for the meeting and apologize. You can miss a scheduled appointment and probably come up with a reasonable excuse. You can just get by with a whole lot of things without being prepared. You can go to the grocery store and fake it because you left your list at home. You can panic pack for the trip because you kind of forgot. You can hit the snooze button 5 times and still somehow manage to make it to work on time. And even if you are late, you can probably laugh it off. There's just a lot of things in life you can get away with not being prepared for. But the problem with that is, because of that, it leads us spiritually to believing something that's actually quite dangerous. Because we can take that into our spiritual lives as well, always coming up with some excuse for something. So we can believe that we can get by spiritually being unprepared, and then the next thing you know, we start believing this idea that there is always going to be later. Later, when life's not so hectic, I'll get serious about Jesus. Later, when, maybe there's a crisis, I'll get serious about Jesus. You definitely will then. I guarantee you that one. Maybe you go, when work calms down, later. And because we believe later is always going to happen, sometimes we Christians can default to this plan. It's not atheism. You're not denying Jesus. You're not walking away from the faith. You're not rejecting Jesus. You're just kind of believing that you always have later. You always have tomorrow to get real. You always have just sometime later. And so Jesus drops this parable on us. And he literally puts us right in the middle of the story, because this is not a new thing. We humans have been doing this, I guess, from the beginning, to always think we're going to get serious later, and then later never comes. So Jesus is trying to head that one off. He's trying to talk to his followers, and he's trying to help us to realize that you need to do it right now, because you don't actually have later. You don't know. So welcome to our ongoing message series, Small Stories, Big Truths, where Jesus often will take these little, small illustrations. Some weeks it's been as short as one verse. Today's a little longer. But it's always some little story that just packs an incredible punch, and it's meant to. Jesus didn't withhold his punches. He just dressed them up a little differently. Today, part number 7 on this, the call to be ready for his return. It's one of the parables he told, a story he tells. Matthew chapter 25 is where we're going to be for that. Matthew 25, 1 through 13, and it's page 677 in this pew Bible in front of you. You scan that QR code, or you scan that QR code, or you scan the QR code. You get the hint. There's QR codes everywhere. That'll take you to our digital message notes that not only has the message notes that you can also grab and print at the info center, it also has the scripture passages. So whether you're following along here, whether you're following along there, whether you're following along on the screen, whether you're just going to Google Matthew 25, 1 through 13, I don't care. I just want you to see this, because we're going to walk through this passage, and I don't want you to miss it, because Jesus is about to take a really good punch at where we live, but he's not just doing it to be mean. He's doing it because this stuff really will change our lives, and he's trying to get it changed. Jesus is not in the information business. He's in the transformation business, and that's what he's going to start talking to us about today. So as we dive into this, we actually look at the first verse, Matthew 25, verse 1. Jesus says, "At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom." Now, this is the setting of his story, and if you don't understand the setting, nothing else is going to make sense. So we've got to park it here just for a little while. We're going to park it right here on this one verse, actually longer than we're going to park on any of the rest of them. Because if you don't get this verse, none of the rest is going to make sense. First, in a very broad sense, Jesus is using Jewish wedding language, and his Jewish audience would have understood this immediately. The second he set this up, when this one verse, they would have immediately gotten all the imagery and all the pageantry of a Jewish wedding. So let me quickly bring you into how this would have worked. And this is a very surface level explanation of how Jewish weddings worked. And there was some variation, but generally this is how it worked in the time of Jesus. The groom to be, would go to the bride to be's father and would ask for her hand in marriage, however he did that. Usually there was a dowry involved or something involved. But he would ask for her hand in marriage. And if he said yes, he would bring his daughter in and they would stand before her father and there'd be like a little wedding ceremony. And he would he'd basically say, you're married in all ways except that which leads to children. So they could not consummate their marriage, but they were married in every other sense of the word. Then the groom would leave. Yeah, he'd leave. She'd still be there in her father's house. He'd go, but he was going because now his job was to prepare a house for his bride. So he'd have to go and he'd either go back to his father's house and build on an addition for her and for him to live in so they could start having children and bless the family, or he would have to go build a house from scratch out in some open field somewhere that he would have to buy. And it would take a little while, okay? If you know anything about construction, you're not going to knock up anything but a tent in a few days, okay? So it would take some time. He would be gone for a certain amount of time. And then you get these, what Jesus says, 10 virgins. Now I'm going to come back to why he calls them virgins in a minute. But these are the bridesmaids, okay? This isn't like a game of The Bachelor where these 10 girls are competing for the guy. That's not what he's saying. These are the bridesmaids of the wedding. These were the friends of the bride. And their job in a Jewish wedding was to watch for the groom's return. So their job was to always be ready and look and go, is today the day he comes back? Is today the day he comes back for his bride? Is today the day? Their job was to watch. That was their job for the bride. So while she was making herself ready to be a wife and a mom, they were watching wherever direction he left, okay? Their job was to see him. So when he came back, they would start the party. So think about like our modern day wedding reception. That was their job. Their job was to go, the groom's here, and they'd kick off the party, and they would join the procession of the groom and his parents and his buddies, and they would march through town, and they would come to the bride, and he'd claim his bride, and then they'd start the party there at the dad's house of the bride, and then the whole wedding party would move all the way back wherever he lived, and they'd have more parties. His audience would have immediately remembered all of that as soon as he said, there were 10 virgins who did this. Okay, they would have understood because that's where they lived. That was their culture. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing I want to point out is in 21st century American culture, we don't typically refer to women by their sexual activity. And I know that you read that and you're like, whoa, what is that? Okay, here's a little bit of semantic history. So the word Jesus would have used had multiple meanings. But again, his audience would have understood it all the same way. These were unmarried women. They were the bridesmaids. They weren't the matrons, they were the maids, bridesmaids. So they were virgins, they were unmarried, probably little sisters, family members. I mean, these families were huge, okay? They were probably just family members, but they were just bridesmaids. But in his time and their way of thinking, to call them virgins or call them young maidens, if he was alive today, he probably would have said bridesmaids. That's just not a term they had. They didn't say it that way. That's our American term. So as we're going through it, when I read the passage, I'm going to say virgins, okay? Because I'm not going to change the Bible. But when I'm talking about it, I'm going to say bridesmaids, so you remember we are talking about wedding language. Because again, if you forget that, it's not going to make sense. Okay, it's not going to make any sense at all. Okay, I told you we had to park for a while, so you understand. We're talking about a Jewish wedding, talking about bridesmaids, and the groom who went off. Now we continue the story. 5 of them, verse 2, 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. So now there's a distinction in these bridesmaids. Some were wise and some were not. Now they're all bridesmaids. They're all, this is not a parable to those outside the family. Jesus is talking to us. Okay, we're like the bridesmaids in the story. And he's saying, of these bridesmaids, half were wise, half were foolish. Here's another little semantic history of the Bible. When the Bible uses wise and foolish, it 99% of the time has moral overtones. I can't say 100% because there's always an exception, but 99% of the time there are moral overtones, which means the wise people are also righteous. The foolish the hint is they were unrighteous to some degree. So he's saying these wise ones, they had gone out practically. When they had gone out, they had taken oil. They didn't know how long the groom was going to be, so they were ready for it to be a long time. Maybe it took them a few hours to get from the edge of town to where they were. I don't know the history. I don't know the story. Jesus didn't give us that. What he said was they had some oil, they were ready, and the 5 foolish ones didn't. Now, here's what's interesting. They all took lamps. They all had torches. They were all ready. It'd be like today if we sent out the bridesmaids to wait for the groom and they had their cell phones. It'd be like saying half of them had a little portable brick charger and the other half were on 5%. Right? That's what it would have been like. We would have said, well, that's foolishness. You need to come just in case you need more power. Now you're catching on to what Jesus is starting to say. He's starting to drive home a point already in the story. So now he goes on. Verse 5. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. So now you have this delay. The groom hasn't come back as fast as they thought he would, so then everybody got tired. Now, I actually love this little detail. And this is where the story gets interesting, because in real life, you would not have sent ladies out to possibly have something happen to them in the middle of the night. They wouldn't have gone to sleep. You wouldn't have done that in first century Judaism. You wouldn't have done this. Okay, but Jesus, again, he's making a point, and he's talking to his followers, and he's trying to teach us something, so he's turning the story a little bit already, so his audience was leaning in going, what happened? They all got tired and they fell asleep. And what I love about this is the wise and the foolish fell asleep. See, even the best of us, the most faithful followers of Jesus, we're not going to get it right all the time. We're not going to stumble. Being ready is not about never falling. It's about being ready when the moment counts. It's about being awake and ready enough to where when that moment comes, you're ready for it and you're not scrambling. So even the wise ones fell asleep. But remember, they were already ready. They already had everything in place. They just made a mistake. See, some of you are so convinced that once you make a mistake, God can't use you anymore. You're about to see he can. And just by a little turn of a story, Jesus is reminding us of that little bitty truth. But nonetheless, the groom was delayed, and they had to wait a really long time. Now today, we're so accustomed to having electricity, we think nothing of this. But if they were, say, in the dead of summer and the sun was up until maybe 8 o'clock, sunset, now they're getting tired. There's no electricity, there's no light to switch on, no street light's gonna come on. It's just pitch black, and they go to sleep. And then verse 6, at midnight, so it's hours later, the cry rang out, here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him. Now this is the moment. This is the moment. This was their one job, okay? You had one job to do. This was it. It was midnight, but this was their job. Now who's calling out? In Jewish weddings, it would have been either the groom's father, would have been what we would call the best man. I mean, someone would have been leading that procession of the groom saying, hey, here he is. He's finally finished. The joker finally finished building the house. He's ready to go. Wake up, everybody. And so now these gals are startled awake. Now they're ready to go. Because now what's interesting about this moment is they didn't know it was coming. They sure didn't know it was going to be midnight when he was going to decide to show up. They had to be ready before that ever occurred. They had to already be ready. Being ready is not about scrambling. It's about preparing long before that moment is needed. And already Jesus is trying to make a really heavy point to us. So he moves on in the story. Verses 7 through 9. Then all the virgins, bridesmaids, as I've been reminding you, they woke up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, give us some of your oil. Our lamps are going out. No, they replied. There may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves. See, here's the reality. It was too late to borrow the readiness. The foolish gals realized, oops, we messed up. We had plenty of time to get ready, and we thought we had later. We thought we had a whole lot longer until we needed to be ready, and now we're not ready, and our lamps are going out. So they're the only logical thing they can do. They look at the ones who were ready, and they go, hey, you got extra. Come on, give me some of your oil. Now, if Jesus had just left the story with them saying no, we would have thought, wow, those wise gals were very selfish. But Jesus throws the hook in there of going, well, actually, he gives the reason. There's not enough for us to keep our lamps lit, which was our job, and to give you enough to keep your lamp lit. Remember, they were supposed to start the party, so wherever they would have been in the mind's eye, they had to travel all the way back to the bride's house. They had to keep the lamps going. Their job was to keep the party going all the way to the bride's house. And they're saying there's not enough. So these wise guys, I want to say the only thing they can do, they said, you need to go into town and you need to buy oil. Now, there's a lesson right there too. You can't borrow somebody else's preparedness spiritually. Remember, Jesus is not just talking about weddings here. They already knew that part. He's talking about being ready. He's talking about being prepared, living a faithful life about him. We can't borrow someone else's faith. We really can't. Now, sometimes I'll use that expression. You can borrow our faith until yours is stronger. But what I mean is this is salvation faith. You can't borrow that. You can't say, well, my family believes in Jesus. No. So here's the thing. God the Father doesn't have grandchildren. He only has children. That means you can't borrow it from your parents. You can't borrow it from your friends. You can't borrow it because you're hanging out with a bunch of Christians. It has got to be the oil in your own lamp. You have got to be ready. You can't borrow that when the moment comes. Because the reality was they had plenty of time to get ready. These 5 foolish bridesmaids just thought they had later. They thought they had more time. Until the moment came, they didn't realize how short it really was. They had no way of knowing. The groom knew. He was on his way. The wedding party knew. They were on their way. They had no clue. And then when the moment came, even the wise ones that had made a mistake and they had fallen asleep, they woke up, trimmed their lamps, lit them, and still had enough oil. They were ready when the moment came, even though they had made a mistake and they weren't watching. And I love that because already they're redeemed. They still were doing their part in the story, and they were doing their part for the kingdom. So you can't live on borrowed faith. And these unwise bridesmaids were trying to live on borrowed faith, and you can't do that. So then Jesus goes on, verses 10 through 12. But while they were on their way to buy oil, so while they had gone to town, or they were going to buy this oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the others also came. Lord, Lord, they said, open the door for us. But he replied, truly, I tell you, I don't know you. So this is the tragedy of the story. But the door was shut, and there was nothing the wise bridesmaids could do about it. That was not their power to open the door. Only the groom could open the door. Now, this is where Jesus completely turns the story. This is not how a wedding would have actually worked. Now, there would have been a ton of shame if these bridesmaids had not had enough oil, but they still would have been let in a wedding. But Jesus isn't talking about a wedding. He's talking about when he returns. He's talking about himself. He's the groom. And he's saying that you can't wait until later. Because the tragedy is, later may not ever come. And when you get to that point, what is sobering and hard about this parable is that when the groom is calling back to the unwise bridesmaids, he didn't say, nope, you're not getting in because you weren't good enough. Nope, I'm not letting you in because you weren't pretty enough. Nope, you're not getting in because you didn't look the part. He didn't say that. He didn't say, I'm not letting you in because you didn't know the right things. He said, I don't have a relationship with you. I don't know you. Now, in spiritual language, what Jesus is saying is, you're not even mine. You don't belong to me. You don't belong to the wedding party. You thought you were in. That's the sad part. That's the hard part. They were close enough to hear everything. They were close enough to hear the call. They were close enough to know to be ready, but they missed it by 18 inches. They were so close. And yet the groom still said, I don't even know you. So Jesus concludes this story, looking out over his audience, saying, therefore, keep watch. Because you do not know the day or the hour. That the command is to stay ready. The command is not to get on a calendar and try to count down minutes and days and hours so you can get serious. If you knew Jesus was coming back on June 2nd, I'm going to tell you what most of you would do. You'd get ready on June 1st. I would, right? I mean, if you knew the master was returning on that day, well, I got some time. Memorial Day's coming up. I'm going to grill, have a great time. Come on, right? I mean, Jesus knew that. So he goes, you don't know. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have some kind of clue. Jesus had been talking about that for a chapter and a half. There's a clue, there's a season. You might know the season, but he said, you cannot pinpoint this because Jesus wasn't trying to get us to do this so we could point to a day on the calendar. He wasn't trying to trade prophetic accuracy for laziness because he knew what we do with it. Instead, he goes, you just always be ready. You always be watching. You don't know when the master's coming. You don't know when the groom is returning. You don't know. And since you don't know, you have to live always ready. You have to live always prepared. You have to live doing the job you've been called to do. And that's the sobering part of the story. Because those unwise bridesmaids thought they knew. They thought they had it. They thought they had gotten it, but they didn't. They weren't ready. And not because they didn't have oil, not because they didn't do something. They didn't have a relationship with the groom. They had nothing. They didn't know Jesus. That's the point. What Jesus is trying to convey to us in Matthew 25, 1 through 13 is that readiness isn't a moment. Readiness is a way of life. Readiness isn't about pinpointing a date on the calendar and saying, I'm good until that point, maybe 24 hours ahead. No, readiness is how you live. That means we're talking about daily relationships, not occasional interest. That means we are pouring into that relationship with our Father daily. It's why we emphasize probably to the point you roll your eyes at us, take your sips. Now, if you don't know what sips are, it's because of one of two things. Either one, you've been here a long time and not paid attention, in which case, when we're done today, go to the info center and get the stuff for it because it's about your personal worship time. Or the second one is because you're new today and so you have no clue. And that's cool because at the end, we're going to give you a bag of stuff and part of that's going to explain it because it's that important. Sips is your daily worship time. Okay, I'll remind you of that or I'll tell you that depending on your perspective on that. But it's about spending that time daily, not occasional interest. Sunday-only faith is not enough. Because what if the master comes back on a Friday? You gotta be ready. Readiness isn't a moment, it's a way of life. So it's daily relationships, not occasional interest. Also, it's consistent obedience and not last-minute panic. That's what the unwise bridesmaids try to do. They panic last minute, like, give us more, give us more, give us more. Oh, I gotta go to town and get some. Okay, I'm gonna go to town and get some. Then when they came, it was too late. That's last minute panic. Life trains you that later can happen, but you don't know. Here's the harsh truth. Death's success rate is staggering. You and I are not getting out of this one alive. You don't know. Either the groom returns and takes the bride home, or we die and we go meet him anyway. But either way, you don't know. Consistent obedience. That's why we emphasize small groups so much. Because you can hide in rows, as we like to say, grammatically incorrect, but it works. The row don't know. You can't hide in a circle. Our groups are finishing up this week. I think some of them might stretch it a week or two past that, but I know that. We've got some things coming up in the summer. Maybe you need to sign up right now for the fall. You need to get doing something. Consistent obedience. Or you need to get some friends of yours and say, hey, guy friends, hey, girlfriends, we need to get together. I need this. We need to pray together. Joel, that's kind of radical. Well, it's heaven and hell on the line, so yeah, it's pretty radical. Consistent obedience. You don't have to panic. But also taking straight from the parable, it's personal responsibility, not borrowed spirituality. Again, God doesn't have grandchildren. You don't get in on your parents' faith. You don't get in on your brother's or sister's faith. You don't get in on my faith. You don't get in on our staff's faith. You don't get in on our elders' faith. You get in on your faith, what you do with Jesus. When you stand before your maker, he's not going to say, hey, did you attend Summit Church? He ain't going to care. He already knows. What he's going to ask you is, what did you do with my son? What did you do with Jesus? That's personal responsibility. It's trimming your own lamp and having your own oil. It's owning that and realizing that I am responsible to decide what I'm going to do with Jesus. I'm either going to follow him or I'm not. But I can't blame that on someone else. It's not borrowed spirituality. It's not getting it from somebody else. It's living up to that myself. It's bowing my knee to him now. It's like something that whenever I do a wedding, if I'm doing the wedding of two just really sold out for Jesus Christians, I'll always ask them ahead of time if I can do this one thing right after the groom says I do. Like there's this part in every wedding ceremony that, and you always start with the guy. And you say, okay, hey, dude, do you accept her as your wife? If so, say I do. And he has to say, I do. And then he starts sweating because she's not answered yet, right? He's committed. She hadn't said anything yet, right? He's waiting sweating bullets going, oh, she says yes. And so that's the point I ask the couple ahead of time. I do this ahead of time, of course. And I say, now can I pause right there and remind them that a wedding ceremony is a picture of Jesus and his church? And like every time they go, oh, sure. Because then what I do is I leave the guy and the gal sweating, or the guy sweating and the girl, being all sweet and cute because she knows she's going to say yes. I just hadn't asked her yet. And then I'll walk around front and I'll say, now look, this is what happened on the cross. Jesus stretched out his arms. And the Father said, will you take these people, sinful though they are, as your bride? And Jesus stretched out his arms and said, yes, I will. Before you were ever born, he said, yes, I'll take them. And now he waits for you to answer. That's personal responsibility. That's saying he's already made the first move. He said, I do. Your move. And then I go back to the bride. And I say, now, do you take this joker to be your husband? And she always goes, yes. But boy, just for a minute, he's wondering. Jesus waits for you just to say yes. He's already said yes. He made the harder move. He had to die. Personal responsibility, not borrowed spirituality. And also as a congregation, as a church, we want to be the kind of church that lives ready, not just gathers regularly. Sometimes people, especially in a sermon like this, when you talk about end times and eschatology, someone will always try to pin us down and say, well, hey, are you pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib, pre-trib, premillennial, post-millennial, amillennial? And they'll go through all the stuff. And I'm like, our official stance is this. Summit Church is on the welcoming committee, not the planning committee. We're going to be ready for his return. Because that's literally what Jesus just told us. Be ready to welcome him. We're not looking for events. We're looking for a Savior. We're not looking to fill out a timeline so we can impress everybody. No. We're going to take what he's given us and we're going to live ready for his return. There's literally heaven and hell waiting in the balance here. We don't have time for some of this stuff. Now, I'm a theological nerd. I love it. And I've got friends that literally, every position I just named, I've got someone I know dearly who falls somewhere in that spectrum. And we can argue all day long, but you know what every one of us agree on? Jesus is coming back, so you better be ready. Gateway Church fits in a certain spot. Yosemite Church fits in a certain spot. Life Place Church sits in a certain spot. New Life Fellowship sits in a certain spot. Christian Life Center sits in a certain spot. Summit Church sits in a certain spot, but every one of them says the same thing. The bride better be ready when the groom shows up. Or as I would sometimes tell our staff, look busy. Jesus is coming. Just be ready. That's our job as a congregation. Be ready. Live to do the mission of Jesus to make more disciples. See, we know why the groom is delayed. See, in the story, they don't know. We know. The Bible's told us that Jesus is delayed in his return because the Father wants more to come to faith in Jesus. He wants to save more. And this delay is so that more people can find him. It's not just so we can be fat, dumb, and happy. It's because our job is to grab people and go to heaven with them. It's our job to get a bus ready to go. Maybe you don't want to go tonight on that bus, but our job is to get people ready. It's to be ready because you don't know. The sobering part of this parable, the part that really makes us sit up and go, is really not that the groom was delayed. That doesn't really bother us deep down. I mean, we can certainly see Jesus has been delayed now for about 2,000 years. We can see the delay, and that doesn't bother us that much. What really bothers us deep down are the unwise bridesmaids who thought they were ready, but they weren't. They're the ones that bother us because we wonder, is that us? And that's kind of Jesus' point. It's for us to stop long enough to go, is that us? Or are we ready? Are we living foolishly and just pursuing the things of this world that are just going to, as soon as we die? Are we living for eternity? That's what we're supposed to ask. That's what we're supposed to see in this passage, because readiness isn't a moment. Readiness is a way of life. So saints, the question is not, do you believe he's coming back? The question is, are you living in such a way to prove that you're ready when he does? I want Jesus, when he comes back, to have no trouble recognizing me. And I want Jesus to have no trouble recognizing you because you're sold out. Now, of course, he's going to know his own, but you know what I'm saying. That you live in such a way that it's proving you're ready and that you know you're ready. Because readiness isn't a moment. Readiness is a way of life. Let's pray. Father, help us to live ready. Lord, help us to always be ready for the moment that we don't know. That we don't know if we're going to have later, but we have right now. We have this moment. Lord, we're not even promised the next breath. Help my brothers and sisters to not think that they might have next year or 10 years or 20 years, because we don't know. You have numbered our days. Teach us to number them as well. Lord, help us to live ready in wonderful anticipation of your glorious appearing. And Lord, should you not return before we cross death, thank you that death simply brings us to your presence. And we see you face to face. Either way, we win. So may we live ready. In Jesus' name, amen.